It is Tuesday, October 20th, 2020. I'm Pastor Thor Ramsey with Center Church. This is Gospel for Five, where we take 5 minutes out of our day and focus on the gospel and the one who saved our soul, because Jesus Christ is the gospel. So we ended up yesterday around verse 15. Maybe we ended at verse 14, but we're talking about the Apostle Paul. We're just going over, recapping verses 11 through 24. But we're picking up here in verse 15. Paul, again, talking about his life before he was the Apostle Paul, talking about his life in Judaism, his life as Saul of Tarsus, who was advancing beyond most of his peers. And then we talked about he was called then by the grace of God. He didn't deserve it. None of us deserve it. Again, grace is unmerited favor. It's favor you don't deserve. One person on this earth is not more worthy of grace than another person. That is just false. There is no one who deserves grace. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, but by grace are saved through the free gift of his Son and what he has done. By grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone, is the motto of the Reformation, I should say. So, and then Paul says that God was pleased to reveal his Son to him in order that he might preach Christ among the Gentiles. So, God, in his own sovereign grace, called Paul for his own good purposes. This last Sunday, we talked about God being sovereign over all things and all people. And one of the things brought up in our small group discussion was the idea of, well, then why pray, why try, why evangelize? It's kind of the fatalistic point of view. But again, it's not a biblical point of view, because a biblical point of view is this: though God is sovereign over all things, and let's say God has a plan for a person like the Apostle Paul. God has a plan for someone. He has a plan for everyone, but he has a plan for someone within his church, within his kingdom. Now, here's the thing. God has an end. He's sovereign. That end is going to come about. No one can thwart God's purpose for that person, but God uses means to accomplish his end. And the means he uses is us. We are his means to accomplish his will in this earth. And it is a great privilege and honor to be a part of anything God is doing. So the fatalistic person is really just revealing the rebellious nature of their heart. That's all that is. Fatalism, in other words, saying, well, if God's sovereign, then why even try, is really just an excuse. Don't you want to be part of what God is doing? Well, if you do, the privilege is to be used by God in his sovereign purposes to accomplish his grace in the lives of people. All right? So I may have to address that on Sunday too. I think it's a good point that people need to be reminded of. So he was called by grace to preach the gospel. He didn't immediately consult anyone. Verse 17, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me. So Paul is putting himself in the same class, in the same category as the Apostle Peter, as the Apostle John. So Paul understands his position, and he's not ashamed of it, because what? He's called by grace. He's not saying, I deserve this. He's not arrogantly he's just called by Jesus Christ. They were called by Jesus Christ for the same purposes. He has the same office in the church, so to speak, as these other apostles. But he didn't go up to speak to them. But I went away into Arabia and returned again to Damascus. Verse 18, then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to visit Cephas, or Peter, and remained with him 15 days. We talked about that. He goes, he visits Peter. But I saw none of the other apostles except James, the Lord's brother. So the only two apostles he really spends any time with after 3 years. This is the first 3 years of Paul being a Christian, is the Apostle Peter and the Apostle James. Well, James was not originally one of the 12 disciples, but he did have a prominent role in the church in Jerusalem. All right, so we're verse 20, just a few more verses to recap this. Let's stop here today. We'll pick up at verse 20 tomorrow. So what has God said to you today? What do you